Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, you could argue that education, as we broadly define it in terms of our societal needs, is the single most important investment and allocation of resources a community can make. However, during this very acute moment of legislative sessions in North and South Carolina, the very growth we celebrate in this region is also a burden to balance how to best apply limited government resources. Welcome again to the longest running and most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. I am Chris William, and as we do week after week, what are the most critical issues that we face, and how do we best manage those challenges? We will ask our panel, and later on, Colonial Life CEO Tim Arnold.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Zan Peters-Tyler of the South Carolina Association of Independent Homeschools, Anita Brown-Graham from the Institute for Emerging Issues, and special guest Tim Arnold, President and CEO of Colonial Life. Here's Chris Williams.
Hello, welcome to our program. Ladies, glad to have you both here. Zan, welcome. This might be just painful for you, and I don't say that for Anita. I say that just in general, but we're glad to have you here, too.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm not sure what that means about you with me.
Let's, so here we are near the end of legislative sessions in North and South Carolina. North Carolina's short session, South Carolina's wrapping up just general session. Anita, any of the debate you see, and we're not going to get to HB2 yet, but any of the debate that goes on in North Carolina, are you encouraged from an education, workforce development, labor market standpoint of any of the dialogue that's going on in the House and the Senate?
I'm absolutely encouraged. As you know, Chris, we've been spending a lot of time at the Institute for Emerging Issues looking at changing skills needed for a world in which there will be increased technological change and automation in jobs. And so to see the debate around schools that are failing, to see the debate around the role community colleges play in their relationship with four-year universities, and even the debate about what we do with some of our higher ed campuses, rigorous debate, very robust. Lots of people disagree, but we're having the conversation in North Carolina, and that's the first step toward getting somewhere.
You know, is there a way to take, and I know you take politics out of the South, is like, forget about it, it's not going to happen. But is there a way to take politics out of the debate around what the education system really needs to look like and make some hard choices on not just the higher ed allocation of resources, but really what's important in K through 12?
Well, it's not clear to me what you mean when you say take politics out of it. And if somebody asked me, do I think we should take politics out of it? My answer would actually be no. Because the reality is that there are lots of different interests at stake. And politics is where those interests get worked out. The question is whether we can get to a place and then stick to a plan long enough for there to be effective implementation.
Interesting. Okay, well, we'll have to drill down more into that. Zan, jump into this. So you represent, and this is just a thumbnail way of saying it, but you represent homeschooling to a large degree in South Carolina.
Right.
How does that play into this debate around the arc of education and the way it's supposed to go? It can't, and I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question, but it can't all be about homeschooling or charter schools or just public schools or private. But how can you be a leader in this dialogue?
Well, I think that homeschooling brings so much to the table in terms of just bringing an educated workforce into play. The educational principles that make homeschooling work is an IEP for every student, students who can pursue their passions, students who learn to think critically and aren't just taught to the test. And so we're seeing our kids go on to do amazing things in government, in politics, in education, those types of things. So I think the more freedom there is in education, actually, the more we're able to implement some new educational policies into the mix.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
For instance, with homeschooling, because it's largely unregulated in South Carolina now, I was threatened with jail when I began homeschooling, but now it's very free in North Carolina and in South Carolina. And so I think the educational environment should be saying what makes homeschooling work so well, because our test scores are at the 76 to 86 percentile categorically across the board, which means we've moved the bell curve over a quartile when it comes to academic achievement in measurable standards. And so I think with charter schools, with homeschools, you're seeing relaxed regulations where there's more parental involvement. And I think in any educational system, parental involvement is going to be the key to success in the classroom.
You know, no pun intended, but academically, and when you just hear the idea of an IEP, which is individual education plan for each student, you will get a lot of, as you well know, a lot of pushback from public schools, because that's a lot more compliance, a lot more work.
Right.
And I don't want to go too far down this road, but how do you get that idea of a customized approach for every student? And oh yeah, by the way, you got to do it with the same budget you had last year.
Right, right. Well, I think that's always the problem in the classroom. Some people say smaller classrooms help that. Other educators say smaller classrooms don't help that. But I think that we're going to have to focus more on the student. Bill Gates said years ago that public education in high school is outmoded now for the technological industries we have, and he said we need to have curriculum that promote rigor, relationship, and relevance.
Mm-hmm.
And so because homeschooling and private schools or charter schools are like speedboats, we can move quickly with change, with change in the workforce,
mm-hmm.
change in STEM, all of those things. And the public school system is just a bigger system that can't respond as quickly. And unfortunately, they're overregulated. And now as we see the federal government want to play more and more of a role in education, yep. I think that's the death knell. I think once you take local school boards, parents, principals out of the mix, then you've got real problems.
So let's zoom back out to a more policy debate. If you were in the North Carolina General Assembly or in the State House, and you had to make a tough decision between education funding or transportation, which are the two hottest issues in both states right now. Anita, especially you, with your unique point of view on both of these issues, how do we approach trying to figure out Department of Transportation, roads, transportation in general, which really we're talking about community development. How do you prioritize these issues, and what would you tell legislators? What would be important to remember when they're allocating resources?
So at current levels, North Carolina is spending more money on education than it is on any other single issue, and I actually think that's the right thing to do. If we don't get our talent development right, we won't have jobs for people to need to ride to work or to go from place to place or to move materials and exports. We've got to invest in the human capital infrastructure. It feels in some ways, Chris, and it's funny because you actually asked me this question the last time I was on your show. Apparently I didn't give you the right answer then, and I'm probably not giving it to you now. But it feels in some ways like a false choice. Obviously you need to have both. But to the extent that you're making hard choices with limited resources, I think you cannot cut education short.
Yeah, how do you answer that, Zan?
I would say, of course, it's the largest item in our budget in South Carolina, and our per capita spending on students is really astronomical. Homeschooling, charter schools, all of these private alternatives are spending much less per child, and we're turning out kids that are very well educated, going on to do very well in college and in the workforce. So I'm not sure in South Carolina's case more money in education is the answer. Perhaps maybe better allocation of it, but not more money. We're facing a crisis in South Carolina right now in terms of our infrastructure, roads, Department of Transportation, because of the flood we experienced in October. Our roads were already in crisis situation, but we still have probably over 100 bridges and roads out just because of the flood. I know coming here today, I came the back way to avoid a lot of the school traffic and didn't realize that there was a bridge that was still closed, turned around, head back toward the interstate. And so and there is a huge package that the governor is promoting with roads now to promote our infrastructure of roads. We have a lot of tourism. We've got to have good roads.
Look, take a minute, just, it's not going to be fair, Anita, because it's a minute on this subject. HB2 in North Carolina, not so much about whether politically you go along with what the General Assembly has done around HB2, but interestingly enough, UNC System President Margaret Spellings has come out recently and said, while we certainly understand what HB2 is, we are not going to enforce it. And she went on to say, not because we don't agree or disagree with it, but rather when you're trying to follow federal mandate by the DOJ that's pushed back on what HB2 means in North Carolina and what the General Assembly has put in place about a law around HB2. Basically, the UNC system is caught between a rock and a hard place, to overuse a metaphor. But the point about her response and that kind of response to what opposing forces here and a policy mean, is that a better dialogue to be having in North Carolina than being so polarized about gender-specific issues around bathrooms?
So, first of all, I think President Spellings' response is a reasoned one. She is governed by state and federal law. Both the state government and the federal government are significant funders. There are important ramifications one way or the other, and basically she's saying if the federal courts are going to decide it, then we're going to wait to see what the federal courts tell us the law should be. That makes perfect sense to me. There are also efforts underfoot, however, to try to deal with the underlying issues at hand. And one of the things that I'm perhaps most heartened by is this effort by former Governor Jim Martin and former Lieutenant Governor Dennis Wicker to try to see if they can't bring people together across the ideological spectrum to deal with the actual substance of HB2. If they're successful, and I have no idea whether they will be or not, I think that will say something about North Carolina's ability to really have hard conversations.
Do you get a sense politically that the ground, quote unquote, in North Carolina is prepared for the dialogue with former Governor Martin and Lieutenant Governor Wicker?
My sense is that people are ready for some resolution to this issue.
Or at least a beginning in the debate.
You got it.
Okay. Ladies, thank you. Stay with us. Next week on this program, he's the head of Department of Revenue in North Carolina. His name is Jeffrey Epstein, and the Secretary of Revenue will join us next week on this program. And then coming up as well, Dr. William Roper. What a storied resume on this gentleman. He's been the head of the UNC Healthcare for a long time and the dean of the medical school there. He'll be our guest on this program, as well as Terry Aiken, who is the CEO of Greensboro-based Cone Health, will also be joining us. When he was last with us, we had to cut off an answer, not because of any fault from him, but rather he was answering a fairly important question and he had to do it within 30 seconds, so we just didn't beat the clock. So let's pick up where we left off. Joining us again is Colonial Life President and Chief Executive Officer Tim Arnold. Tim, welcome back.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for having me back.
So, Tim, let's re-cue this idea. The question was, just kind of refresh you and everyone that's was watching it last time, was it seems like you and Colonial Health are much more engaged in the communities that you serve, and not just in the Midlands and Columbia, but all Colonial Health communities. And you were going on to say the three important aspects of why we were doing that. You hit two of them, but let's start over again. Let's give you a restart here. Why is important, you know, not just for business, Tim, but why is it important for Colonial to put their brand down on an issue in a community?
Yeah, I think the answer actually is very relevant to the topic here today. So last time we talked about the three areas of emphasis that we have relative to our public-private partnerships. The first of those is the cultural arts. We're a big supporter of the arts community, especially in the Midlands and South Carolina. The second is health and wellness. I think that's the one we probably didn't get to last time. Mm-hmm. But the third, and the one that we see as the most important, is really supporting education. So we have a group of 1,200 people in Columbia who are extremely dedicated to helping out in the community. We believe that by supporting education, we can actually prevent some of the other problems that we're seeing in the community, and then certainly help overcome some of the issues that we see in the community. So increasingly we're moving the dollars that we have available to support the community toward education. Last year we contributed about $2.4 million in the community there in Columbia, not including our partnership with USC. Our employees donated about 11,000 hours of their time to support various community efforts, and again, the overwhelming majority of those being in education.
Yeah. Anita?
We've been talking a little bit here about the pressures on education and the need for our education systems to be flexible enough to be able to respond to the demands of employers. In my own work, one of the demands that employers are struggling with is that of technological automation and how that is changing the nature of work for employees that exist. Can you talk a little bit in your industry, in your company, how are you seeing technology change work?
It's a great question, Anita. It's for us, it's changing the skill set we're looking for. So it doesn't mean that everyone has to be fluent with all types of technology. Certainly doesn't mean that people need to be programmers or systems analysts. But having the ability to understand the way technology can impact the lives of our customers in a meaningful and positive way. As a recent example, we introduced electronic claim submission. So now our customers can use their iPhone or smart device to actually upload their claim, including all the documentation they need, and then have their claim paid the next day. And so technology, we believe, is an enabler for not just customer service aspects, but also even on the sales front, we see ways for technology to enable the sales process. But that means you have to have employees who understand technology and understand the ways that technology can be used to make the lives better for the people we serve.
Well, but let me follow up on that quickly, Tim. But if you're, what's the motivation for you as a company? Is one-dimensional here, this question. But the idea is if you're shortening the claims payment, then that means that you don't have the float of the money within the company. Yeah. So doesn't that end up impacting an earning or a top-line growth?
We actually take the longer view on that, Chris. That's a good question, but we believe that it's actually will bring us more customers because we're providing faster service and making people happier. Our mission is to provide financial protection products for as many of America's workers and their families as we can. America's workers, especially middle-income workers, are very underserved. There was a recent survey by the Federal Reserve that said that 47% of working Americans could not make a $400 emergency contribution. So if they had some sort of emergency in their life, they could not come up with $400 to solve that emergency. The products that we manufacture and sell are there to help people in those kinds of emergencies. So critical illness, accident, cancer. When people have things go wrong, our products can help them at a relatively modest premium rate.
So one follow-up question, when people hear the words technological automation, they immediately go to the, oh my gosh, a robot's going to take my job. Yeah. Are you finding that you are needing to hire fewer people as a result of these technological platforms, or is it just that you need different people with different skills?
For us, it's been different people with different skills. And so in the last 4 years, the number of people in our company under the age of 30 has grown by 50%.
Wow.
And so what's really great about that group coming in is that they're helping those of us who are not under 30 learn how to use technology more effectively as well. And so for us, it's just about different skills. Our company has been growing for the last 4 years pretty significantly, and the number of people that we're bringing in is also growing. It's just people with different skill sets.
Terrific. Good message.
That's right. One of the things I'm interested in, just coming from an educational framework, is the rising disaster or crisis of student debt as kids get out of college. And the difference, I have a 38-year-old son and a 28-year-old daughter and one in between. The difference we're seeing in the debt load that her friends have 10 years after my oldest son who graduated is really staggering and phenomenal. So I wonder, because you deal so much with financial literacy, if you have any thoughts on how to help kids stay out of so much debt in the educational process, or how to retire their debt in a significantly quicker way?
Yeah. It's a great question, and we think it's a growing issue. I know when I was in college, we had student loan debt, but it compares not at all to the student loan debt levels that people are seeing today. There are employers out there who are now creating programs to help kids pay their debt off if they will agree to stay with the employer for a certain length of time. We think that's a potential solution. There are a number of scholarships available to people who may not actually even know about it. And so I would encourage parents who have a child going into college. We have one still in college and one just graduated. But really thoroughly explore what those opportunities are, because oftentimes universities have potential scholarship opportunities that people may not even know about. And then last, and I hate to bring this back to Colonial life, but if you're in a situation where you have a lot of college debt, then that means you probably aren't able to handle anything that might go wrong otherwise. So whether it's through our company or someone else, I would say make sure you have a financial protection package that affords you the opportunity to continue to service that retirement, that college debt, and then also be able to take care of anything else that may go wrong.
One thing we see a lot in the homeschooling community, because parents have to be really frugal when they homeschool. They're usually one income, many tithe to their church, and they're paying property taxes to schools, but also having to buy their own curriculum. So these families practice a lot of frugality anyway, and we're seeing a lot of education, especially in the middle school and high school level, just in terms of a practical course on financial management. I never had anything like that when I was in high school or college. I had a dad who drilled those things into me. But has Colonial Life ever thought about maybe helping to develop some type of program that could be used in schools to teach financial management?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we don't see that as our area of expertise, but what we do is partner with an organization named COFE, K-O-F-E, Knowledge of Financial Education. And what they do for our customers is provide the very kinds of financial education you're talking about, and help people understand the risks that they may have, help them understand the types of products that are out there, products that have nothing to do with our industry, but automobile insurance, health insurance, things like that, that people can leverage to protect themselves, again, at a relatively low cost. What our benefits counselors do is help people understand where they may have exposure that they may not be aware of. So oftentimes an employer may have a $200 deductible on the health care plan, but there's a lot of pressure on employers today to limit their costs. So they'll put in a $5,000 deductible. And sometimes the employees don't even know about it until it's time to enroll. And so our benefits counselors help educate people about that and where those gaps are and how they might be able to cover those gaps.
Tim, Obamacare, Affordable Care Act. Now the statistical evidence for premiums are coming in, and insurance companies that offer these first-line coverage in the Carolinas have average increases of anywhere from 19 to 25% in premiums. I mean, that's huge. Texas had a 60% increase. The point is as the Affordable Care Act pushes premiums higher than expected, is this a surprise to you, and how sustainable are these types of premium increases?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris. On the medical side, I think there were a number of people who wondered whether the initial rates would be sustainable or not. But for our industry, the Affordable Care Act has actually been a very positive thing. So it's done a couple things. First of all, it's brought more people into the insurance world who may not have been before. And then second, it tends to have people come in at very, very thin levels of coverage. And so when they understand that they have a product that really doesn't allow benefits until a certain level of expense has been incurred, they realize they can't cover that. And that's where our products come in and help people fund those really high levels of deductible. So for us initially, the Affordable Care Act was a little bit of a challenge because the entire community of distributors for us sort of went into a little bit of a paralysis mode, trying to understand what it is and what it's going to do. But now that it's been implemented, it's actually giving some tailwind.
We've got about a minute left. Anita, do you have a quick question?
I do. So I wonder if I might follow up on this question about the ACA, because as many companies, United Healthcare just announced that it was pulling out of the industry. What is that going to mean to your consumers?
We believe there ultimately will be some answer for people. We think that the Affordable Care Act will survive. It may have some modification, but we believe it will survive. And we think that the medical industry, that's not our industry, but we believe that people on the health insurance side will figure out a way to make that work. We think that they'll work with government to find a way to make it work. We still believe that the pressures on health costs are going to be there, and that's going to continue to cause employers to choose plans that create gaps that actually create opportunity for us.
Yeah, Tim, thank you. Didn't have to cut you off. Thank you for being so.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for being so gracious about it. Good to have you back on the program.
Great to be back. Thank you.
Okay, good to see you. Zan, nice to have you here. Please
It
come
was
back.
great to be here. I'd love to. Thank you.
Meet you.
Anita, always nice to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We in a respectful way, always say we're part of Anita's army in emerging issues. Thank you for watching our program. We certainly have, I hope you have a good weekend. If you have any questions or comments, carolinabusinessreview.org. Until next week, good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.